If you have already seen parts 1 through 3 of this 6-part series of videos, please fast forward for the new material while I review. The entire series gives evidence that contradicts the claim on the Oxfraud.com website that there is no connection between the life of Edward de Vere and the works of Shakespeare. These videos take the form of a trial to ascertain who is guilty of the crime of writing the works of Shakespeare. In this investigation, the approach is simple. The plays and poems constitute a crime scene. We must examine the crime scene to help generate profiles of two suspects. I'll be following a special procedure, one in which much of the evidence for the Oxfordian case will rely on hostile witnesses, Stratfordian scholars, i.e. those who believe the author is William Shakespeare from Stratford. For those of you wondering why I pronounce the name as Shakespeare, it's because I am using the spelling on his baptism entry. In his personal life, the man from Stratford never spelled his name with an E after the letter K. This slide shows the 7 categories I will examine, and this video covers law, music, power, and Italy. In each category I use the same approach. What do Stratfordian scholars say about the writer Shakespeare? How does William of Stratford connect to these people and events? What connections exist between Oxford, Edward de Vere, and these people and events? So, let's look at law, music, power, and Italy. Connection to Shakespeare. Knowledge of law. There's very little disagreement in academia that the author was deeply knowledgeable regarding the law. I'll let you pause the video to read this slide. Shakespeare's connection to knowledge of law, no known connection. The record shows that William had some experience with lawsuits and property, but no record shows that William attended or was associated with Gray's Inn or engaged in legal activity as a lawyer. Connection to Oxford, knowledge of law. Oxford matriculated at Gray's Inn, although there is no evidence of residency, and in his position as Premier Earl he sat as a judge on state trials, including both Mary Queen of Scots trial and the Essex trial. At least one of his tutors was an acknowledged scholar in civil law, Sir Thomas Smith, who tutored Oxford from the age of 4 to 12. Smith did not see law as a technical sideline, but rather an integrated part of one's education. Oxford was raised in the most legal political house in England, and Cecil was noted, his guardian, was noted for encouraging the nobility to have a thorough education for the good of the country. Music. Connection to Shakespeare. It's scarcely a matter of surprise, therefore, that the musical student should look in Shakespeare for music and find it treated of from several points of view completely and accurately. This particular book is the first to treat at full length the contribution which music makes to Shakespeare's great tragedies. The method that is peculiar to Shakespeare, the employment of song and instrumental music to a degree hitherto unknown, and their use as an integral part of the dramatic structure. Knowledge of music, connection to Shakespeare, no known connection. Knowledge of music, connection to Oxford. Oxford was known as an accomplished musician and patron of music. John Farmer dedicated 2 music books to him, 2 musical works bearing his name, the Earl of Oxford's March and the Earl of Oxford's Galliard, may have been composed by him. Knowledge of power, connection to Shakespeare. Adolf Berle, former ambassador and special assistant to the Secretary of State under President Kennedy, in his book Power, his treatment of modern political power in its myriad manifestations, says, "One wonders what the personal reveries of a Plantagenet or Tudor dictator must have been. Shakespeare probably gives a better analysis than historians. His pictures of the breakdown of Macbeth, of Richard II, and of Richard III are more convincing than most historical studies. Perhaps the best education a power holder could have would be a solid acquaintance with Shakespeare's plays." Knowledge of power, connection to Shakespeare, no known connection. He's never mentioned in the company of power holders or being present in court. Knowledge of power, connection to Oxford, A.L. Rowse again. The 17th Earl of Oxford was, as the numbering shows, immensely aristocratic, and this was the clue to his career. In Elizabethan society, full of new and upcoming men, some of them at the very top, like the Bacons and Cecils, the Boleyns themselves, from whom the Queen descended, were a new family. The Oxford earldom stood out as the oldest in the land. He was the premier earl, and, as hereditary Lord Great Chamberlain, took place on the right hand of the Queen and bore the sword of state before her. Knowledge of Italy, connection to Shakespeare. Shakespeare evinces a varied and profound knowledge of the country in general and of our cities in particular. This was written by an Italian. Innumerable are the passages where he speaks of special characteristics of our peninsula, of her history, and of her customs. He knew that Padua, with all its learning, was under the protection of Venice, and that Mantua was not. The various scenes in Othello are no mere Venetian reminiscences, but pictures exhaling the very spirit of Venice, which Shakespeare has transferred to his drama. Knowledge of Italy, connection to Shakespeare, no known connection, and there is no evidence he ever left England. Knowledge of Italy, connection to Oxford. Of the 16 months Oxford travelled the continent, 10 were spent in Upper Italy, primarily in Venice, Padua, Milan, and Florence. Continuing with Oxford, knowledge of Italy, Shakespeare plays with locations in or excessive references to, and I'll let you pause to read this slide.